This video looks at the role of relative pronouns in Old English and how they are used to form a relative clause. A relative clause adds further information to an independent clause by attaching a word or a phrase to it. Now, a relative clause is a dependent clause that is introduced using a relative pronoun such as who, whom, which, that, whose. It is called a relative pronoun because it relates back to a prior noun or pronoun, which is called the antecedent. Old English did not have a system of relative pronouns like the modern English ones listed above. Instead, what they had to do was to make use of the indeclinable relative particle. So indeclinable meaning it didn't change form, it just had this form of the thorn symbol and e, the. Okay, it did not change according to case, number, gender, and so it was indeclinable. Okay, it's called the relative particle because it points back to a previous noun or pronoun, so relative. It's used either alone or in combination with a demonstrative. It could also use the demonstrative on its own. So there's three situations here. The relative particle the could be used on its own, as in this example here. It could be used with a demonstrative together, the two of them, or just the demonstrative itself, as we'll see in some examples, could act as the relative particle, as the relative pronoun. Okay, so let's start here. That weave, the weaveth. The woman who weaves. Okay, the relative pronoun conjunction is the. Who, meaning who. Weaveth means weaves. Okay, the woman who weaves. Okay, the woman who weaves. First verb conjugated is plural. Third person present tense. Remember, the system of persons is first, second, and third. The first person speaks to the second person about the third person, so you can think of it as that way. Okay, so the woman, that's in accusative, weef in accusative, and so the accusative demonstrative for that singular is that. Okay, that weef, the weef, who, the weaveth, weaves. All right, hey afslag. Apologies, let me start again. Hey afslag van 'n alderman the him lenges wonade. This comes from the story of Kuna Wolf and Kuna Head, and the word up here is afslag. Okay, hey afslag van 'n alderman the him lenges wonade. He killed the nobleman who had remained with him the longest. So the subject in the first clause, the primary clause, the independent clause is he, hey. Afslag, first verb conjugated. Okay, von alderman. Okay, that's the object in the accusative. Okay, he killed the nobleman. Who, the relative particle is used to represent who, the relative pronoun who. Him, the indirect object, with him. Okay, so that's the person who remained with the nobleman. Longest remained. Okay, that verb there is conjugate. So the verb in the subordinate clause is at the end again, and that will be the case throughout. This is a subordinate clause. A relative clause is a form of subordinate clause, and so the verbs will go to the end. Okay, he is the king whom the priest saw. He is thona kuning the tha preostas yasawan. Okay, so he, the subject, is thona kuning, the accusative. Kuning then is a masculine noun because we have thona in front. Alderman up here must be a masculine noun as well, hence thona, the demonstrative here is the masculine accusative singular. Thona kuning, the whom this time. Okay, so you have to interpret it according to circumstance. The could be who, it could be whom, and it could be other things too. Tha preostas. Okay, now tha here is representing the plural. Praeostas is the accusative, so it's plural for priests in the accusative. Tha is the appropriate demonstrative that goes in front of that. Yasawan, past tense, saw. Okay, past tense, saw, Yasawan. Third person, plural. Plural, third person. All right, next bit. The bird which I have. Seifuchol the ich habe. The bird which I have. Okay, so the subject here in the first clause is simply the bird, full stop. The is now which. Before it was who, and then whom, and now it's which. You need to be flexible when you interpret this, okay? It can take on a number of words. It can represent any one of the relative pronouns I mentioned earlier on the previous slide. Then the subordinate clause, the relative clause, the secondary clause, ich habe, verb at the end, I have. Now let's have a look at another one. He did it on the same day, that, okay, equals on which, that or on which. They intended to bear him to the funeral pile. Okay, so the primary clause, the main clause, the independent clause, subject, verb, object, indirect object in the usual word order. He doede hit thu ilkan daya, the he hina totham ade beren waldon. Okay, there's two verbs here, and both those verbs are going to the end. The first of which, intended, okay, goes to the very end in its conjugated form, past tense, plural past tense, waldon. Bear is the next verb, and it just goes in the infinitive form in the second last place. Okay, so here is the dependent secondary clause, the relative clause, and here is the main or independent clause at the front here. Okay, and in this case, the stands for that or on which, either one, that, or on which, whichever prefers. He did it on the same day on which they intended to bear him to the funeral pile, or he did it on the same day that they intended to bear him to the funeral pile. Okay. Okay, so just again, the secondary dependent clause, the has the verbs at the very end, which marks it out as a dependent secondary clause. In this case, attached by a relative conjunction, there. He seized one of the lions who wished to devour him. He yalachte ana leon the hina beaten walde. Okay, subject, conjugated verb, object, the accusative, ana leon, a lion, one lion. Conjunction the, which, in this case, the object hina him is the object here. The second verb infinitive, are beaten, and the primary verb. So in the secondary clause here, the first verb is wished, so we need that past tense there. Second person past tense, Walder wished. And then devour him, we simply need that in the infinitive form. That goes in the second last place. All the verbs at the end in a dependent clause. Okay. What else is there? As soon as you see the word hina, you can know straight away it's in the accusative. Thu se Beowulf say there with Barekan Wuna. Okay, are you the Beowulf? Are you that Beowulf who struggled against Brecken? Okay. Say there in this case is he who. Okay, it's still a relative pronoun. Who, he who, or just who. Say there, who. The say is the masculine demonstrative, so you know it's he who. Ert, now this is a question, so the verb goes to the front. Ert thu say Beowulf. Are you the Beowulf? Okay, he who or who against Brecken struggled. Okay, so he who against Brecken, that's with Brecken, wune, struggled, and that's conjugated. So past tense, conjugated. Past tense, struggled. Next one is sometimes you'll see say or there. Seo is the feminine demonstrative. So you know that means she who. Okay. By putting say there or seo there is who, and by putting the masculine or feminine demonstrative out front, you can work out whether the meaning is he who or she who. Okay. An mayeth that he machon. Now, a tribe who can, that he, that they, okay, that they, and machon is can, an meaning a single tribe. So an mayeth that he machon. Here the relative conjunction is that he, meaning that they, or just who. A tribe who can, or a tribe that they can. Okay, a tribe who can in modern English. So you can also have say, seo, and that. Okay, remember say is a masculine demonstrative. Seo, as it here, is the feminine demonstrative, and that is the neuter demonstrative. Okay, so an mayeth that he machon, a tribe who can. An almichti God is thonather Bartholomeus bodeth. Now, the one Almighty God is him who Bartholomew preaches about. So this is a Old English writing in the Old English version of the Bible. The one Almighty God is him who, the relative pronoun, him who Bartholomew preaches about. Okay. An almichti God is thonather Bartholomeus bodath. Okay. The Almighty God is him who Bartholomew preaches about. So, an almichti God is thonather Bartholomeus bodath. Okay. Notice the verb at the end here. Here the verb comes at the end because there's no object here or indirect object or anything else. All right. That is seo fachtho and se feon shipper thaster ich wain havo. Okay, and here is just a coordinating conjunction, so we've covered that in previous videos. The main point here is this thas there. Thas is the genitive demonstrative article, and so thas there, you could interpret that as of which, or even of who. Of which, of who. Okay, this time I'm using the eth symbol instead of the thorn symbol for both of those at the beginning there. Okay, that is seo fachto, and se feon shipper, thaster ich wain havo. Okay, so here you have the primary clause, subject, first verb conjugated. Now, seo fachto is also subject, so that is the feud and the hostility, subject. Both seo and say mark them out as in the nominative, so they are subjects. So that is a subject. Okay, could be the accusative. I'll take it as a subject is referring to an object or a thing. In this case, it's referring to two things, the feud and the hostility. So seo and say deliberately mark them out as nouns and the subject. Okay, thus there, of which, ich I, wain, expectation, havo, have. Okay, so this is I have an expectation of this feud and hostility. Okay, just be aware of that. Soon as that seo and the sayer deliberately put there to mark those out as the subject, as a noun in a nominative form. If they're in a nominative form, they are the subject. Okay, that can be nominative or accusative. You have to watch out for that. In this case, I'll take it as a subject as the nominative, and so the subject, because that is referencing these two nouns here. Okay, heo was minara gulta thara the ich ye faremede ye mundi. Okay, now this has a main clause, heo was minara gulta ye mundi. Okay, she was of my sins mindful. But then we want to interrupt that with a subordinate relative clause. A relative clause, which is a subordinate clause, is interrupting the main clause. The main clause is she was of my sins mindful. We just want to interrupt that with a bit of extra information of those which I committed. Okay, so we sort of, you can imagine a person there sounding a bit defensive and saying, well, I'm only responsible, she's only mindful of the ones that I committed, not everything. Not all sins that are happening around us, just the ones I committed, she's mindful of. Okay, so a little bit of extra information in the form of a relative clause inserted in there, of those which, and to say of those which, we use the, standing for which, and then thara, of those, because thara is the plural genitive. So there's thara, thara, there's two different spellings at least, but the A on the end marks the plural. It is the plural demonstrative genitive. It's in the genitive case, plural demonstrative. So it's the plural of the in the genitive case. Okay, in the genitive plural case. So of those, thara, the, which. Okay, so heo was minora gulta thara the ich yefremede yemundi. Okay, so you can see heo was minora gulta, comma, then you see thara the ich yefremede, comma, yemundi. So this time the relative clause, dependent clause interrupts the main clause right in the middle of it rather than coming at the end. All my other examples, most of them have been coming at the end. In fact, I think all of them so far. All right, now, michti derichten sulith erlum meta tham there his habeth. Now, the mighty Lord gives food to all for those who have of him awe. Okay, so let's deal with this bit by bit. Michti derichten, the mighty Lord. Sulith gives, okay. Conjugated present tense, sulith, plural, sulith, sulith, erlum. Now this is indirect object in the dative. We know it's in the dative. The um ending tells us it's in the dative. So to all, when you see a dative, when you translate the dative, you put a preposition in front of it. In this case, the word to is the appropriate word. Makes sense. To all. El is all. Erlum is dative, so to all. Okay, the object here is meta. We know it's the object because meta is food and it's in the accusative, so it's the direct object. Okay, so the mighty Lord gives to all food, or gives food to all. And then we have this relative conjunction. We know it's relative because we have the, which is which, who, those, what. Okay, but then we have here who, even. Then we have in the front tham. Now, what is tham? Tham is the dative plural of the word the, or those. The, that, those. That is the dative plural of the, that, those. And in this case, we need those. Now, being dative, so we have those who. Now, when we translate this to modern English, we have to supply, because it's in the dative, we have to supply an appropriate preposition. Those who, well, the appropriate preposition to apply here would be for those who, because that makes sense. The mighty Lord gives to all food for those who of him or have. Okay, so tham there, his is subject, his is the subject. It's actually genitive, so when we translate that, it'll be of him because it's referring back to the mighty Lord. Eya is awe, in awe of, so respect, fear of, okay, or wonderment at, if you don't like fear, wonderment at. First verb conjugated, have, habeth, okay, habeth. So, michti derichten suleth erlum meta tham the his eya habeth. Okay, so subject, conjugated verb, indirect object, object, then the relative conjunction, and then you have subject, object, and habeth. Okay, now, all right, let's have a look at another one. Thona todaleth, he, his fech, that thar tolava bith. Okay, Then are dividing they, are todalith, are dividing he, they, his, fair, money, wealth, riches, which, that in this case, which makes sense for that. That's the relative pronoun, that. So that introduces the relative clause because it's going to add a little bit more information. Then are dividing they his money, which there at the time remains shall, which there, thar, tolava remains shall, bith. All right. Shall is that sort of future tense there. It will remain after everything else. They are dividing whatever remains there after some event. So it's future tense. Okay, so bith, third person singular. All right, so what we have is thona todaleth, he, his fech, that thar tolava bith. Okay, they then are dividing his money, which shall there at the time remain. Okay, note that todaleth is in the imperative form. Okay, so what we have here is a statement. Todaleth is in the imperative form, so which is why the sentence begins with a verb, because it is a statement. Remember, questions, statements, declarations, commands, they begin with the verb. Okay, so what we have here is a statement, and that's why the sentence begins with a verb. Okay, thona tadaleth he his fech that thar tolava bith. Then are dividing they his money, which there at the time remains. Not can, I made a mistake, shall. I thought I proofread everything, and no, these mistakes keep slipping through. That is shall. Sorry, people, that is shall. Se mon duruchten se eo tha mathmas yef. The Lord of men. One mon man directen, man Lord, Lord of men. The Lord of men who say gave to you the treasure. So say here the masculine demonstrative is representing not he, but, well, it is a he, Lord of men, but who. Okay, in this case it stands for the relative particle, so it's introducing the relative pronoun, and the appropriate translation is who. You just have to be aware of that. Sometimes you're not going to have the relative particle there, you're not going to have these thats or the other stuff, you're not even going to have say there, you're just going to have say, and you have to understand that that's got to be interpreted as a relative particle, meaning who, relative pronoun who. You, the treasures, gave. Notice how you, the plural you, the treasures, okay, that's in accusative, gave, and then the verb at the end. So this is a relative clause, this is a dependent clause, okay, secondary clause because the verbs are all at the end there, and you have a conjunction in here, relative conjunction. Se mon druchten se eo tha mathmas yef. Okay, the Lord of man, who, he who, to you the treasures gave. Okay, he was, is the one who went home alone. So there's two questions here, there's two statements, here, two sentences. He was the one who went home alone, and also he is the one who went home alone. Depends on what you want to say. Past tense, present tense, it's up to you what you want to say. To do all that, he was thona anan se tohama ana eode. Okay, he was the one who to home alone went. Okay, he was the one who went home alone. Okay, so the relative clause is introduced by the relative particle, relative pronoun who. Okay, and then went home alone. So say represents the relative particle here, the relative pronoun who, and then tohama ana erda. Okay, so notice that the verb has to go at the very end. It's past tense, erda, second person past tense, so erda went. What else was there? Okay, to is a preposition, and it requires a dative object. So home must be in the dative. So harm is the nominative for home. but the dative is put an E on the end, so hama, that's the dative singular, hama. An, ne, alone, and eoda, went. He was thona anan se to hama ana eoda. Okay, now if we want to say he is the one who went home alone, then we would say he is thona anan se to hama ana eoda. He is the one who to home alone went. She is the one who went home alone. So same, instead of he this time, we're going to have heo, and we have heo was tha anan seo, not say, seo, because it's a she, but both are translated say and seo in this context are translated as the single word who. Okay, tohama ane eoda. Notice the object here, this was the masculine accusative, this was the feminine accusative. Okay, that's the difference there. Same verb, eoda. Tohama, same indirect object. The conjunction, the relative pronoun use is different. For him, it's a say. For her, a seo. Okay, heo is tha anan seo tohama ane eoda. She is the one who to home alone went. Notice the differences there. First, the independent clause, the primary clause. Excuse me, sorry. Subject, verb, object, as covered in previous videos. Then the relative pronoun conjunction. Then the verb at the end for the dependent secondary clause. Everything else in front of that. And then finally, excuse me, finally a image. And again, I apologise to the owner of the image. I can't remember where on earth I got it, but I like to finish with one of these images. Just imagine the language going around the table there, people discussing all kinds of words flying about, but words like we've been using in this video, or this series of videos, I should say. Meta for food, water for water, and so on.